Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the playoff hypotheticals as we head into this year. There are a number that could really affect the outcome of the champion this upcoming year, and we'll probably continue to get into those. A number of ones that I still want to get to, so be on the lookout for that next week. But let's get into some fall camp intel. There are a million things happening around the sport, but the biggest one happened in Columbus yesterday. Will Howard has officially been named the starting quarterback for the Ohio State Buckeyes. This was one that I think all of us felt like it was going to happen one way or the other. I thought it was going to happen a little bit earlier than it did, and frankly, I think they waited a touch too long already, but he finally is named the starting quarterback for them, and frankly, I think it was a pretty easy decision at the end of the day. And it's not that Devin Brown is not a good player, it's not that he can't come into this offense and make some good plays. He doesn't bring the running ability that Will Howard does. And frankly, that's the end-all be-all. If Chip Kelly has the same exact quarterback in front of him from a passing perspective, which roughly he did between these two, I think Will Howard might have been a touch better, but roughly they are the same level of passer. You're going to take the guy that can extend plays. You're going to take the guy that can run read options, especially with the running backs that you have. And you're going to take a guy that can run through a linebacker's face. It's plain and simple. He is an absolute beast. And he's one of those guys that a lot of people have been talking about. Ohio State didn't upgrade. He was the backup at Kansas State, and now he's the starter at Ohio State. This kid is incredible. He's one of those guys that is going to play as hard as can be every single Saturday. And if y'all watch that Big 12 championship against TCU, you know he has something in there that Ohio State desperately needs, which is just outright toughness and a desire to win at every single second of the game. So I very much like this, not only from a scheme perspective and a player perspective, but from a personality perspective, this guy fits the bill. I can promise you that. The O-line is coming along very nicely, it seems. Seth McLaughlin is leading the way at center, a very talented guy. Donovan Jackson is a known commodity. There's no worries about that, I can promise you. But, excuse me, there is a little bit of a battle going on at the other guard position over at right guard. It sounds like I apologize. Tegra Shabula is a very, very talented kid that tends to have the inside track there, so definitely something to watch, and no line that really needs to step up their game from a year ago. And then Kojo Antwi just continues to make plays. This is one of my favorite under-the-radar players that going into this year. I think he is one of the most purely athletic guys in that room with just ridiculous athletes all across it. So very excited to see this guy flash this year. And then once a couple of those guys walk off into the NFL, he's going to be a downright beast. I can promise you that. Moving over to Missouri, they had a big-time injury. Darius Smith, a very talented edge rusher that came over from UGA, has gone down with a knee injury, and he will be out for the year. This is a huge loss for Missouri. They needed someone coming off that edge. They needed someone that was going to be able to pressure the passer, and as of right now, as I see it, I think Williams-Nwaneri is very talented. I don't think he's all the way there to be able to compete with some of the tackles that he's going to have to go up against. So it's no disrespect to this team. I think this team is going to be a really fun one, and I think offensively they're going to be as good as there is in the conference. This defense is making me more nervous by the day, and I don't necessarily feel the same way about this team as a lot of people do. I think it's very likely they take a little bit of a step back. That being said, there's still really good players on this team, and a lot of them are taking that captain role on. They introduced their captain this past week, I believe a couple of days ago. Brady Cook doing it for the third time in a row. There was no question that he was going to be one of these. Theo Weiss getting this nod at the wide receiver position, the veteran guy in that room, not a super big surprise there. Christian Williams, a very talented defensive tackle, been there a long time. Johnny Walker Jr. is the other edge rusher that you're going to have to worry about for Missouri. And then Chuck Hicks, a very talented linebacker, are going to be the captains for this year. No big-time surprises, all really good players and definitely guys that deserve that role, and it's always cool. It's never not cool seeing that guy get that honor because a lot of these guys really care about that. A lot of these guys want to represent their university with that C on their chest, and whenever they get that opportunity, it's always a cool thing to see. But moving on to Kentucky, they got a little bit of a running back problem up in Kentucky. Chip Trayanum is reportedly going to miss the first two games of the 2024 season. He broke his hand last week. This was a big-time pickup from Ohio State and definitely was one of those guys that could make some noise. That he is a very, very talented player. Didn't really get to show himself at Ohio State for pretty obvious reasons with that running back room, but is a very talented kid nonetheless, and I think will be a huge player for them. It's less than ideal, obviously. You do have guys right behind him. Sumo Karingbe is one of my favorite players in the country. Very solid, does a lot of really good things, and is probably the best run blocker on this team. So, or not run blocker in general, but running back blocking. He's probably the best at that throughout the country. But you got to step up pretty quickly. South Carolina's in week 2. Week 3 is UGA. If this guy is not ready and up and running by week 3, you might have a little bit of an issue. But there is some help from the younger players. Jamarian Wilcox is someone I want to talk about. He burst onto the scene after redshirting last year, a very, very talented kid and someone that I expect to make plenty of plays this upcoming year. Maybe the most outright talented running back in that entire group. A couple other names to watch. Fred Ferrer is a very talented, or Ferre, I'm not exactly sure, a very talented wide receiver for them that is making some noise in a very deep and talented wide receiver room overall. And then Octavius Oxadine is someone I want to talk about. This guy was really good last year, flashed at different moments, was a little bit inconsistent at times, but this guy is really athletic and definitely can make a number of plays and is one of those guys that when you talk about Kentucky, he's not the first one to come out of your mouth, but he might just be at the end of the season. Oklahoma had another injury trouble. Jaden Gibson, a very talented wide receiver for them and someone really one of my favorite outright players in the entire country. He is going to be out for the year. It sounds like he got a knee injury throughout camp, and he will be out for the 2024 season. Absolutely hate this for this kid. This is one of the most electric, explosive players in the entire country, and I think especially with someone like Jackson Arnold throwing the ball, he was going to have a lot of fun in this offense. So hope he gets healthy, gets back on the field as quickly as possible. But let's talk about Jackson Arnold because it sounds like things are not going quite as smoothly as they want. Now, to be totally fair, Brent Venables' defenses are not easy to dissect. So, especially as a young quarterback, it's not crazy to see that he is not necessarily winning the battles between the defense right now. But you do have to see a little bit of improvement before you get to that week 1 matchup. I think he'll have a little bit of a runway to get things going, but that Tulane game could get a little bit sketchy if he doesn't come fully prepared in that one. And then a couple other names. Deion Burks, we've talked about a number of times, but Javonte Barnes is someone I want to talk about. He might just be their feature back this upcoming year. I think Gavin Sawchuk is a really good player. I think Javonte Barnes is the more talented guy, and I think he's going to make plenty of plays this upcoming year for them. Moving on to Florida, they had another injury. Imagine that. Jamari Lyons was carted off the field after a scrimmage suffering a broken ankle. He will miss the 2024 season, and that stinks. He was going to be a big-time player for them, appeared in all 12 games a year ago, and while he didn't put up the craziest stats in the world, was definitely going to be a huge player for them. And that defensive front is super, super important for this team. So when you look around, Joey Slackman coming over from Penn is a huge, huge pickup at this point and definitely someone that you're likely going to put more on his shoulders to make some plays in that interior. But this is a huge loss. No two ways about that. And definitely one that Florida could ill afford at the very least. So something to watch there and definitely one that could affect Florida's season, especially early on with the incredible offensive line that is coming in for Miami in week 1. Over at A&M, you have a couple of different injury news that aren't quite as bad, which is good news. Anai White, a very talented defensive edge. He's got a little bit of a knee issue. Seems like he'll be back in plenty of time. Jabri Barber, a wide receiver that came over from Troy. He's dealing with a little bit of a foot, but sounds like it's not going to be too big of a problem. He will be back in the starting lineup by the start of the season, and it sounds like, in fact, he described Barber way ahead of schedule. So I expect him to be back, and that's a huge piece for this wide receiver group that seems to be not overly confident in what they have, at least from a depth perspective. So definitely something to watch there. But then you got Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy, a very talented defensive tackle, one of those guys that you came out of high school and really just wanted to see this guy shine. It sounds like he's starting to shine, so very excited to see that. Albert Regis, another guy to watch on that defensive tackle front. Javon Thomas, a freshman corner that's making a ton of plays. Dalton Brooks, a freshman safety that's making a ton of plays. It sounds like Marcel Reed is pulling away in that second quarterback battle against Jalen Henderson, although Jalen Henderson might have a little bit of an edge, at least from history perspective. And then Micah Teese is another person that's coming along a great way, and that's a huge player for them because as we talked about, the wide receiver depth isn't great. He is someone that could definitely help that out a ton. So a lot of really good news out of A&M. I think there's, some injuries that you got to deal with, but it sounds like everyone's going to be good to go for that opening week, and you can't say the same about Notre Dame. So you got to feel pretty good if you're an A&M fan right about now. But moving on, I want to talk about some quarterback battles around the country. We talked about Cade McNamara and his disastrous scrimmage that he had this past week. They'll have another one this weekend, so maybe he'll get back in a groove. But as of right now, as I see it, Brendan Sullivan's going to be the starter for this team at some point. Maybe it's not week one. Maybe he doesn't trot out there with the starters right away. But if this is what we're getting from Cade McNamara this year, there is no doubt in my mind that they're going to want to go to Brendan Sullivan at some point. So I expect that to happen for sure. I think over at Michigan, it's Alex Orji's job. Unless something crazy happens over the next little bit, then Alex Orji will be the starting quarterback in week one and week two and going forward. But at the end of the day, it could be, a Jalen Milroe type situation where he gets taken out after a bad performance against Texas, or it could be a situation where Jack Tuttle gets back from some of the injuries he's been dealing with and just ends up being the better player. Who knows? But as of right now, I feel pretty confident that this is your guy throughout the season for Michigan. North Carolina might have the heatest battle in the entire country, where Max Johnson, Connor Harrell, and Jacoby Criswell are all kind of in this thing. Jacoby Criswell is a little bit on the outside looking in, but it sounds like Max Johnson might have the inside track here, is the veteran of this group, and a very talented guy that can at least move the ball down the field, and that's really all you need if you're a North Carolina fan this upcoming year. But then you have someone like Connor Harrell. He's more physically talented. There's no doubt about that. He is someone that absolutely has a higher ceiling than Max Johnson, and you just got to figure out if he can come along the way that you want him to and make the reps that you want him to as a young player. So I think there's a chance that both those guys play in the season opener, and we'll see what happens from there. It's definitely going to be one of those that I tend to believe will continue into the season and will be very interesting to watch as we get throughout. But Maryland's the last one I want to talk about. Billy Edwards is the favorite right now. He's the veteran. He actually is the outright leader of this team in a lot of ways, so I would be very surprised if it was not him going into week one. That being said, I do think it's going to be MJ Morris at the end of the year. I do think MJ Morris has the more physical ability, and I think once this season starts going a little bit sideways for Maryland in a couple of different ways, Mike Locksley is going to look at that kid and say, that's our future. Let's put him out there on the field and let him get some big-time reps. So overall, I think there's so many injuries coming out right around this time of year, and you hate to see it every single time, but it's something that we got to unpack. It's something that we got to talk about because it has a real-time impact on this upcoming season. I mean, Texas' year looks a lot different than it did a week ago. I can promise you that. So definitely will be really interesting to unpack the rest of these as they happen, and hopefully there's not too much more and we can get to week one unscathed, but we'll update you with everything you need to know as you need to know it. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a weekend roundup, a couple of things that I just want to get on y'all's radar, a couple of headlines and some really cool stories from around college football that I'll get into right after this, so stick with us.